David Manne is a refugee lawyer and the Executive Director of the Refugee and Immigration Legal Centre, and he joins me now from Melbourne. Now, David Manne, these details are just coming in about the deal that Australia and Malaysia has been working on for months now. We do know that as of midnight tonight, any asylum seekers arriving to Australia will be sent to Malaysia, 800 of them. They would be kept in detention for up to 45 days before they're released. What do you make of the deal so far as you know it?
Look, it's vital that we have all the details revealed so that we can see whether what's on paper lives up to what's been promised here, including the proper protection, the proper treatment of anyone expelled from Australia, a refugee treaty signatory, to a country that's not, Malaysia.
Some of the details that we're getting about this transfer arrangement, we know that people arriving in Australia will be subjected to what they call pre-transfer assessments to ensure their fitness and their suitability for transfer. Would you be happy with that, to make sure that we're not sending back people who are chronically ill or not up to the task of being transferred to Malaysia?
Look, the fact is that currently on Christmas Island, since the announcement on 7 May, hundreds of people, including children, some of them unaccompanied, a wife and a child trying to reunite with the husband here, who's been found to be a refugee, and a pregnant woman currently on Christmas Island in legal limbo. It's completely unclear at the moment what assessment would be undertaken to work out whether those people would be subject to expulsion to Malaysia or anywhere else. And so what we need is all of the details.
Under this deal, as I mentioned, people being transferred to Malaysia will be in a transit centre for up to 45 days and then they will be released. Surely it could be argued that that is better than being held in a detention centre on Christmas Island or on mainland Australia for months and months and months and months.
Look, it's really extremely regrettable that it's come to this at all, that Australia, as a signatory to the Refugee Treaty, has shirked its obligations in relation to the protection of people by proposing to expel them to a country that has not signed the Refugee Treaty, and to condemning them essentially to a situation of great uncertainty, a precarious situation in a country such as Malaysia, which has a very troubling track record when it comes to the treatment of refugees. That remains a central concern here.
This detail that we've also been given is that following initial processing, people transferred to Malaysia will be able to move into the community. They'll have the right to work. They'll have access to education and healthcare. Are you prepared to accept those assurances?
What we need to now see is all of the details about how that's actually going to be implemented and monitored. Because what we know is that Malaysia is a country with a long-standing record of very serious mistreatment of refugees and asylum seekers in its country. It's good to hear that there is a commitment in this arrangement to ensure that people will be treated differently under these expulsion arrangements to the tens of thousands of people who are currently there, who face on a daily basis a cycle of very serious abuse. But the real question here is, how is this going to be monitored? How is it going to be assured, this is concrete, credible assurances, are going to be given to ensure that people are not subject to those types of forms of mistreatment that we know exist and have for a long time in Malaysia? How will that happen is the real question.
Well, the detail, as you say, we're not entirely clear on. We do know that these people would get support from the UNHCR and the International Organisation for Migration. The UNHCR says it's not a signatory to this arrangement, but it has been consulted and it thinks that this will deliver protection dividends in both countries. I mean, surely that's an assurance from an organisation of that stature about the status of these people.
Well, the UNHCR has not signed to guarantee anything. What it's done is essentially to set bottom lines on what it considers to be bare minimum standards that would need to be reached and assured in this type of agreement. But what it hasn't done is agreed to sign up to it. I mean, this is a side deal. This is a side deal, a refugee swap between two countries. And it also stands to reason that the UN Refugee Agency doesn't actually provide protection to people. Countries provide protection to people, and that's the bottom line here, is to ensure that there are credible, concrete assurances for the people expelled from a country that has signed up to the Refugee Treaty to one that hasn't. And there remain real concerns about how that's going to be monitored to ensure that, that the real protection is provided, and also that those expelled are not left languishing in limbo for years on end without any future in sight in terms of reaching safety and security in their lives.
Well, that's an interesting point, because this document also says that those transferees will receive no preferential treatment in the processing of their claims or arrangements for resettlement. So it's unclear how long they'd have to remain in Malaysia before their claims are settled.
Well, what we know at the moment is that there are over 90,000 refugees on the books of the UN Refugee Agency. What we also know is that worldwide there are tens of millions of people seeking protection, that is, needing to be resettled to safety somewhere. And what we also know is that really each year less than 90,000 people achieve those sorts of resettlement outcomes. So what we're looking at here in terms of basic sums is the real prospect of people being expelled to a situation where they will languish in limbo for many years, many years, in a situation also in a country where there have been great dangers for refugees in the past. So what we need are concrete, credible assurances here that people will not be subjected to ongoing harm, and that there will be some sort of outcome for them in the future so they can reach a situation of safety and security in their lives, and that is not at all guaranteed at this point.
The federal government has made it clear that an objective of this policy is to deter people smuggling, to try to, in effect, stop the boats. We know that 11 boats have arrived, or more than 500 people, since this policy was first announced. What measure of success should we use to gauge this policy's effectiveness?
One of the real concerns here, of course, is that in seeking to deter people from coming to Australia, is that in doing so, there is the real prospect of actually placing people who've already been harmed, who are fleeing from harm, of expelling them into harm's way again. And this is a very, very troubling aspect of the agreement. I mean, it depends on what you look at for measures of success, but really at the end of the day, this is about ensuring that people who are fleeing from harm are not placed in harm's way again, but rather placed in a situation of protection. Now, the real proof will be in what protections are provided to people who come to Australia and who may be subject to this expulsion agreement. And that remains very uncertain.
Sorry, and finally, as we've discussed, more than 500 people have arrived since Australia and Malaysia tried to nut out this deal. The Minister has made it plain today that those people who have arrived in Australia before the 25th of July today are not going to be transferred to Malaysia. And he's saying that they will be detained, mostly on Christmas Island, and they will now be processed in Australia. Are you reassured that that group of people are no longer in a bit of a legal limbo there?
Well, time will tell as to whether the government honours that promise, but what's clear at the moment is that those people do remain in legal limbo, and that every day is another day of damage when they're incarcerated in remote detention. What needs to happen is they need to have their cases examined to see why they're here, and if they're owed protection, to be granted that protection instead of being left in a situation which really gets us squarely into the zone of arbitrary and quite potentially unlawful detention. Well, the fact is the government has no proper plan in place for expulsion of those people. It doesn't know when, where or how to do that, and so it's time to get on with processing their cases and protecting them in Australia if they're refugees.
Well, David Manne from the Refugee and Immigration Legal Centre, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon and giving us your running assessment of this deal, which we've finally just seen signed in Kuala Lumpur.
Thank you.